Good afternoon. I'm Tony Shaffer. I'm the president of the London Center for Policy Research, and this is the Thought to Action podcast. This will be the London Center's weekly presentation of information relating to the center's work and our focus. And our first episode, we're going to bring in one of our senior fellows who's been working on a number of key issues, and that is Lieutenant Colonel retired Tim Wilson. Tim, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to our new venue of presentation, and I'd like you to kind of walk through your thoughts and some of the things we're doing, and lay out what you have been up to as well.
Thank you, Tony. Great pleasure to be here, and I'm
Sure.
really excited to see this go forward. I am, as Tony said, Lieutenant Colonel retired Tim Wilson from, as you may gather from the accent, I was 32 years in the British Army. I came over here first when I was a small boy, 4 years old, stayed for a couple of years. My first school was in America, so I've always said right throughout my career that I learned the Pledge of Allegiance before I learned God Save the King. I've since married an American lady and become an American citizen, and I'm very proud to be so. I run the Second Amendment Project at the London Center for Policy Research, and I'm deeply interested, and I'm something of a data geek, so I like to look at facts. And the way that we at the London Center operate is very much data-driven, operating on a solid foundation of facts and moving forward to policies. And as Tony said, we've called this podcast Thought to Action because we have ideas and we'd like to take them through to actually achieving something tangible.
Right. On that point, I think the audience may be familiar with things we've done that have not been necessarily public. And I think that's one of the things we will start to explore as we go through and do these podcasts on a regular basis. Some of our other senior fellows that the public is aware of is Gordon Chang. Gordon does a great deal of work on China. We will be working to get his point of view out. Bud McFarland, the former National Security Advisor of President Reagan, is one of our senior fellows, as well as former Director of CIA, Jim Woolsey. And again, as Tim pointed out, we embrace both sides of the political aisle. It's more about how do we actually address things effectively rather than simply do nice white papers. So Tim, back over to you to talk about some of the things that you've been involved with and what you think is important.
There's a whole raft of issues that are obviously important. I will say another little aspect to this is that my background, like Tony's, involved military intelligence, and it gives us, I think, a somewhat different approach, certainly from the professional politicians and bureaucrats, in that we look at a problem and then we look for practical solutions to achieve the aim. The Second Amendment Project, which is my main focus at the moment, is one that I'm deeply invested in. I've liked guns for a long time. I was a very keen target shooter, and I went through the British collapse of private firearms when there was an incident in a town called Hungerford where a mass shooting occurred. And I saw the writing on the wall and had to get rid of all my private firearms. Since I've come here, I've built up a small collection, but I am a huge believer that it is one of the unique aspects of America, as some of the founding fathers actually said, that Americans have the right to keep and bear arms. And there's been a great push recently by a number of people. Gun control comes and pushes come and go, but it's interesting just how the rhetoric has got more heated, and the current push by the gun control movement is to say that there's a gun crime epidemic. I just look at the solid basic data behind that, where the number of guns in private hands have tripled in the last 40 years, at the same time as violent crime has halved, and the number of shootings has dropped. And I look at it and just say, hang on, the private citizen, the law-abiding citizen of the US, can be trusted with guns.
So on that point, there's two elements that we're actually working. I want to make the public aware of. First is the fact that the very essence, the very fact of ownership means that people buy these things. By having a large market, a huge amount of research and development is invested in maintaining access to that market by manufacturers. I would argue, and I think the statistics actually show this, is that having a strong commercial sector actually helps the military, by the fact that the military then does not have to invest vast amounts of money into research regarding small arms. And I would argue that many nations that actually have a strong Second Amendment protection has a very strong commercial wing, commercial sector that supports it. And I think that's one of the key things, is that while the military does not instruct the commercial market, it does benefit from the commercial market because of all of the different technologies which are bettered by civilian use. Now, another thing that links to this, Tim, and I think you would agree, is that there's a perception on the left that guns are bad. And I would argue it's not the left, it's the extreme left, because traditional liberals and libertarians join us on this issue, the issue of gun ownership and self-protection. Notably, there's been a movement called the BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, Marxist, which is calling for the defunding of police. So if you defund police and you take away guns, what are you left with? And I think it's very apparent that the issues that we face, that we're dealing with, have not a thing to do about bettering the public's safety or improving individual rights. It's all about a collective idea that was created by Trotsky, by those on the left, by the idea that only a small group of politicians, of political apparatchiks, are the ones who should be able to determine who benefits by having weapons. The old Orwell thing, all animals are created equal. Some animals are created more equal than others. Well, the more equal animals are the only ones that are supposed to be armed. All the other animals are supposed to just kind of go along. So how do you see the need? How do you see the path to organize those traditional liberals and the conservatives on this issue going forward?
I find it interesting that the focus is always on assault rifles, assault weapons, weapons of war, as they call them, when in fact what we're talking about is hunting rifles that happen to look like the military firearms that people who served are particularly familiar with. And the number of murders committed with rifles in this country is far less than those committed by knives, by factors, feet and fists, blunt objects. All of those are far more commonly used for murder than rifles. It's also interesting to me that despite the push that there is some sort of gun violence epidemic, over this period when we've seen all this disturbance in America, we're seeing a huge rise in the number of first-time gun buyers.
Right.
Over the last 6 months, somewhere between 2.5 and maybe 4 million new gun buyers, and on top of the existing gun owners. That's going to put private gun ownership in this country well up over 400 million guns, and in something like 100 million households.
And to that point, the London Center was putting together a first-time gun ownership video with Sig Sauer. Tim, as a matter of fact, for the audience to know, you actually wrote that. So while you couldn't participate, you did write the basic concept for the video, and we're going to be putting that out as a public service announcement. And that's the point. This is a public service. The idea is that the right of gun ownership should be exercised with a great deal of skill and understanding. With that said, I think the left tends to ignore that very fact, that people who have guns go through a background check. Every time you or I want to buy a gun, we get checked. I just bought one recently. I was checked. To have a concealed carry permit, you must be checked. And one of the stats that I've always found interesting, and you've talked about a number of times, is that people who have concealed carry licenses are actually more law-abiding than law enforcement. Do you want to talk about that real quick for a second?
Sure. Basically, it was a fairly small study in a limited number of states, 5 or 6 states. But at the end of the day, what we found was that law-abiding citizens are not a problem. And those with concealed carry permits, which obviously doesn't include states like Vermont, are actually 6 times less likely to commit a felony than police officers.
Wow.
The law-abiding citizen really is a law-abiding citizen who
Right.
can be trusted with guns. The problem is criminal guns, and most of those are obtained by theft and by smuggling, associated in huge proportion to drug misuse, drug
Right.
smuggling, illegal drug sales. If any of the policies that were being brought forward might do something to stop those guns, to get those guns off the streets, I think they should be seriously considered. But at the moment, all the gun control policies seem to be aimed at law-abiding gun owners, which is wrong.
That's the point, that there's a constant effort by the left to punish those who comply with the law. And up in upcoming podcasts, one of the other issues that you'll be faced that you'll be dealing with and talking about is the fact that a lot of these gun control laws actually target the minority communities, that some of the people who are most in need of legal gun ownership to deal with the illegal guns, with the guns which are in the hands of felons and drug dealers.
Yep.
The left wants to disarm them and make them victims. And I think people don't seem to understand that the progressive laws of the left actually victimize the most the most at-risk communities, the minority and Black communities, which are victimized.
Absolutely right, and it's the gun control areas in the big cities that are the real problem.
Right.
And that is where studies on defensive gun use are really, really sparse and difficult to do, because a lot of the time a gun owner who legally carries a gun and uses it defensively, which may be as little as making it known that he is carrying, to save his own life or her own life, is happening. Estimates vary between, on the real low ball side, 500,000 times a year, up to 2.5 to 3 million times a year.
Right.
Every day, if you look carefully, you can read in the news that somebody's life was saved by a legally owned firearm being used against or shown at, or, you know, it doesn't have to be shot to be a useful defensive tool.
Right. So we'll be doing a lot more on this topic. Tim will be our lead. He is running our Second Amendment project, and we're looking to do a full-blown conference on this issue in Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2021. So be looking for that. In the meantime, Tim will be doing additional podcasts on this issue. Believe it or not, Ted Nugent and I are doing an editorial on this issue, which should be out very soon. We will be doing a spectrum of issues, issue discussions, podcasts, and other media interactions to highlight this issue, not only for the 2020 election, but for the fact that there's been a progressive, and I use that as a small p progressive effort by the left to remove gun rights from those who are in need of those gun rights. So thank you all for joining us today. Tim Wilson, thank you for joining us. Thank you for—
My pleasure.
Thank you for defecting. You came to the right side. It's always good to see you guys cross the wire. You know, not that I don't like the British. Not that I don't like the British. That's right. Yeah. You know, look, you're welcome here. You should feel very welcome. We love you. So, you know. But thanks, Tim, for being here. Thanks for doing this. And we all hope that you will continue to join the London Center and look for us, thoughttoactionpodcast.com, Thought to Action Podcast TV. And be sure and tune in to our continuing effort to educate the public on key national security issues that do impact everybody's lives, that the informed public is the best defender of the Constitution. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you all again very soon.